Hello and welcome to Sharon Local History, welcome to Sharon, Massachusetts, and welcome to Sharon Historical Society. So Sharon Historical Society holds quarterly meetings with agenda and then a program. This time we met on December 8th on Sunday, and we talked about history of childhood, how kids were viewed, and history and development of toys. We held the meeting at the bottom level because upstairs was full of toys. The group was pretty small because it's before Christmas. I guess people are busy. Dawn kept us on track and we started sharply. Claire Fonman prepared this talk and led it. She is past president, historian, researcher, display person, woman of many skills, and she is fantastic to listen to, so here's your chance.
My objective tonight, or this afternoon, is that you have fun. That's my sole purpose. The other purpose, because I've been an educator for years, is that you learn something. And so if you learn something you never knew today, I will have made my commitment, and I hope it works. What I want you to know about this presentation is something that isn't often recorded by historians, and that's children. And so that's where we start. This is going to look at the role that children played in the formation of our country, and some of the things that guided them and how they were governed. So, as early childhood through the ages, and the time to be explored is from the 1600s to the 1900s. I hope that it will be interesting to compare the beliefs and practices of today to those of the past as we examine how children were cared for, perceived, disciplined, shaped by whom, and what can be agreed upon by historians is that prior to the 20th century, American childhood, as we know it, did not exist, or did it? A great deal has been written about the life struggles and accomplishments of the adults who crossed the ocean to build a world. But of infant and early child life during colonial days, little has ever been recorded. And this is why. Children were valued because they were... I can pick others.
Yeah, don't push anything.
I'm not, okay. Children were valued because of the labor that they could provide. Consequently, even though few children under the age of 7 ever survived a journey across the ocean, parents with young children were still making that voyage with these young children. In fact, a third of the founders of Plymouth were children, and in subsequent years that figure rose to 50% of the population. So these children are doing the labor. They're creating our country, but they've never been credited for doing that. But it wasn't just Puritans who were bringing their children as part of the Great Migration to the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Several cargoes, not just one ship, but several cargoes of orphans from the Dutch almshouses, the poorhouses, were bound out and dispatched from England to the new colony as indentured servants and apprentices. And the London Company sent 100 children to Virginia in 1619 and another 1,500 kidnapped young children from Ireland and England in 1627. After 1620, when Massachusetts became part of the slave trade triangle, African slave children were also being shipped here. So this is all labor. This is all free labor that's coming over.
And none of them came with their parents, correct?
No, there was orphans and people from the almshouse. They were supported by parents. So once here, colonial mothers were giving birth to as many as 10 to 15 children. And they were attributed to the same parents, but also recorded in these records are the burials of the mothers of many, many infants. By 1776, the population of the colonies reached 2.5 million. Think about how many of those were children. Children were valued because their survival meant the survival of the adults' religion and their beliefs, which is why they were coming to this new colony in the first place. So, how did these colonists perceive children? Children were viewed as entering into the world born in sin, and it was a parent's duty to guide them to salvation, breaking their will in the process. Today we would say teaching children that they were born into sin or wicked sinners is child abuse. But back then that was the theory. And children weren't seen as individuals with different needs, nor were they viewed as having different stages of development, which we in early childhood education base our whole teaching practice on today. However, the Puritan world viewed salvation as a hierarchy, a stepladder to salvation. And of course, the elder church officials were on the top, and they were men, the older men in the community. The next rung down were the younger men who were going to become the elders. Then we had women. Then we had children on the rung just above animals. Therefore, babies weren't allowed to crawl. Only animals would navigate the earth on four legs. Crawling was bestial and sinful. From birth to 3 months, babies were swaddled and kept upright, dressed in long gowns and often tied to a board to keep them safe while a mother was busy doing her chores. At 3 months, their arms were freed, and swaddling was believed to mold a child's body, ensuring that it grew straight and tall, making the infant more attractive to everyone. Some historians believe that swaddling was done for reasons of health, but that wasn't really the reason. At 6 to 9 months, swaddling was discontinued, but babies would be put into long gowns to discourage crawling. Now, if you're a child educator, you know that there are natural steps in a child's development, and that crawling is, well, you start with rolling over at 3 months, although every child has their own built-in timetable, but you need to go through a natural progression of development. But I can't imagine how this influenced young colonial children. However, at 6 to 9 months, they were allowed to be freed from the swaddling, and it was the younger children, not the mother, who would now start taking care of the babies. There wasn't any gender difference in clothing. There was no way to tell the difference between a boy or a girl. Pink for a girl and blue for a boy didn't come into practice until the 20th century. And all young children would wear long shifts that could be embellished with a mother's embroidery or lace. Young children didn't wear underwear, and these shifts made toilet training a lot easier and reduced the need for washing soiled clothing in multiple outfits. As children got older, stays were put in their clothes to make sure that they continued to grow straight and maintain an upright posture. Girls would wear stays in adulthood. In fact, women would wear stays throughout their entire life. Girls' clothes never made a change. The dresses that they wore, and the skirts that they wore signified their subordination on that ladder to salvation that I showed you before. Breeching was a good time for a boy. It's when he got his first pair of pants. Happened pretty much when he became fully toilet trained between 4 and 8. And it was the first significant step that that young man took into his superior position in society. Girls never made a clothing change. The skirt or dress signified their subordination. And also, from this point on, children were viewed as miniature adults. There were clearly defined jobs for both boys versus girls. Boys would chop wood, feed animals, and hunt, while girls would grind corn, spin, and weave. In 1648, the Massachusetts colony passed the Satan the Deluder Act. And it stated that the father, or the eldest male in a household, had to conduct spiritual training and education at least once a week, because they wanted to make sure that the religious philosophies that they had left their homeland for was perpetuated. So reading Psalms was intricately connected to salvation. Every family was charged with teaching their children to read so they could read these Psalms. Did it again.
Back to Africa.
Okay. And their letters were learned from a horn book. And you can see A is for, in Adam's fall, we sinned all. That's how they learned their ABCs. The church would appoint tithing men who would visit a household monthly to ensure that the children were being educated. Because it was the church's opinion that there was so much evil in the world that the job wasn't always within parents' capabilities. And they actually went into the home to see how much these children were, being brought up properly. And if they deemed the child wasn't being attended to, wasn't learning their Psalms, then that child would be removed from the family and placed with either some kin or another family that was more capable of the task. This, in essence, is the forerunner of our Department of Children's and Families to go into homes and investigate how children are being brought up. Education was mandatory because how could you learn if you didn't read the Bible and the Psalms and try to earn your salvation? So often the minister would run a school for boys. And some of the older women would run dame schools to teach skills to the youngest of children and older girls. Boys were expected to learn how to read and write. Girls didn't have to learn how to write, only read. In Sharon, Reverend Philip Curtis ran a school to prepare boys for the ministry. That was the beginning of our center school, and his wife ran one for younger children in the parsonage, which was actually in their home.
Okay.
Now, discipline started at this time between the ages of 1 and 2. And a child's will was seen as a manifestation of sin. But bodily or corporal punishment wasn't really used. Their model of discipline was that parents should use examples and explain the reason why their child was being punished. So it was kind. So this is the real change for children. Excuse me. Besides providing food, shelter, and religious education, parents were responsible for providing training in a skill that would make this child useful. This is the beginning of the useful child concept. So, as early as the age of 7 to 12, children started being apprenticed so that they would learn the career they would have for the rest of their lives and be a substantial part of the community. The church believed that children were better provided in these situations of apprenticeship because the affection of parents could blur the vision. And even children left at home were still expected to be productive and acquire skills. So around 1692, once you started having a child reach the age of 7 or 8, you were sending them out as apprentices. You were searching for people who would be willing to take them on as a blacksmith or some other art form, a baker. Now, Deborah Sampson, whose mother was unable to provide for her children, had to place them out. This was a common practice for destitute parents of the time. So at the age of 5, Deborah was put out to a widow, married Prince Thatcher, who taught her how to read and how to spin. She was a widow of a former minister. And because she got to learn how to read at such an early age and how to spin, she displayed an incredible desire for education, which was unusual for girls in that era. When Mrs. Thatcher, when she died, Deborah became an indentured servant in the house of Jeremy Thomas until 1778. In 1782, she enlisted in the Revolution as Robert Shirtliff. She was one of 50 new members of the Light Infantry Company of the 4th Massachusetts Infantry. When her true identity was discovered, she was given an honorable discharge, but the church never took her back in Middleborough because she had been banned for shedding her skirt and wearing men's clothing. It wasn't what she did, it was that she had broken that law. So, Satan's greatest success, these people believed, was in making people think that they had plenty of time before they died to consider their eternal welfare. They considered it was a sin to waste time. So how did play fall into all of this? Any kind of play was banned on Sunday at the Sabbath. Yet children still had swings, they played tag, they played hide and go seek. They had dolls, they had kites, they had boats that they made, they had pets and collections of all kinds. These toys were handmade, made from things that could be found around the home or out in nature. For even in this time period, it was understood that some games helped children learn skills that they would need later in life, like how to aim and throw, how to problem solve with peers, how to do things with your hands, how to follow directions and rules, how to be fair, how to wait their turn, and also how to use their imagination. So colonial children did get to play. And since these families were common to have 6 or 7 children, and brothers and sisters were always available, and if their neighbor was fairly close within walking distance, there were even more children to have fun with and join in games. Since adults didn't have much time, they were always doing chores and trying to survive, they were often left alone to play in the gardens, fields, or in the house when their chores were done. The instructions for games were shared by stories or word of mouth. They were never written down. Just one generation passing down the rules from one generation to the next. The major difference between the 17th century and 18th centuries was that children were no longer viewed as being born in sin. That's a major change. However, the concept of being responsible for teaching children useful skills so that they would be useful members of a society had children working as early as 5 years old, full-time, away from families as apprentices, and it was laying the foundation for the concept of a child as being useful. Let me see. Also at this time, there was a big major division between poor working class families whose children were forced to go to work in factories and on farms, and middle class and upper class children who could remain at home. So on the left you have the working class useful child, and on the right you have the useless child. And the useless child didn't have to work. And if they did have a job, they were allowed to keep the money they earned. The right of parents to take advantage of the productive capacity of their children was long recognized. A child was the property of his father, and the toil of children during the Industrial Revolution was consistent with the belief that started in colonial times, and seldom were questions raised about the right of the father to benefit from the labors of his offsprings. These are all children that are working. So without the stepladder to salvation, the role of men and women as well as children will drastically change. And it was also fueled by the Industrial Revolution and the growing economic divide. Parents of the upper class are sending children to schools that they can pay for. But the age of 8, most of factory employees, the employees in factories, have their children working along beside them in mills or in mines. Thanks to the evolution of the steam engine, factories could now be built anywhere, so the rise of child labor became significantly larger, with families needing someone in their family to make sure that they had enough provisions, shelter, clothing, that the whole family would survive. And there was an influx also of European immigrants who weren't strangers to hard work. So these new factories needed lots and lots of workers, and children were cheap to employ, especially orphans and children who had the type of family that in the past would have been put out by the tithing man. By 1820, children were making up 40% of all mill employees. By 1870, 1 out of every 8 children were employed in these mills or in some kind of manufacturing. It increased 1 to 5 by 1900, and between 1890 and 1910, no less than 18% of all children ages 10 to 15 were working. And it wasn't an easy life, because there weren't any child labor laws. Children were ideal employees because they were small. They could be paid less. They fit in places where it was tight to get in. They were running in between the spinning wheels and looms. Then, you know what? They were less likely to organize and strike against their pitiful working conditions. Very few laws protected workers at that time, but the least of all that were not being protected were children. So the first piece of law that brought some kind of protection to children was the Factory Act of 1833. It said that no one under the age of 9 could work in a factory, and that certificates to show the child's age had to be kept. And it also said that children couldn't work at night and they must have some kind of schooling. Well, the people that were running the factories knew that the inspectors were very far and few behind. You know, there weren't very many. It was also easy to show a piece of paper that had been forged. And there weren't any schools around, not really free ones after the 8th grade. So even if there was a school and the child was eligible to go to it, going to school wasn't compulsory, and no one was checking to see if any particular child was attending. So two new pieces of law had to be made, which took into account these issues. It's interesting to me that this photograph shows that no matter what children did during the day, they would always find a way to play. And this is a card game during a break at a factory in New York. I love these two pictures. Can you tell me why they're here? Or what they are?
Two sisters.
Working class child and the middle income child.
No, they're mugshots. They are actually children that have been arrested. Despite working in the long hours in factories, they weren't making much money. Sometimes their adults would get injured and couldn't work, or they were sick, they couldn't work, so often the burden of supporting a family was completely dependent on a child. These are actual mugshots of children who were arrested for stealing, and many of the prisoners were incarcerated or sentenced to hard labor for petty theft of things like food, firewood, or clothing. They were tried as adults and sentenced as adults. And this happened because their parents couldn't provide for their children's needs. So, all of a sudden, the adults kind of woke up. They realized how hard it was to work in a factory or a mine, etc. And then instead of having large families that were needed to do all the chores on a farm, they started having fewer and fewer numbers of children, and labor unions were formed, and the fight for a living wage began. And instead of the men, or the elder men in the home, it's now women that are responsible for raising children. And any time you got to spend with the dad became seen as a gift. Mothers were seen as the saviors of the race and the hope for the future society. And while fathers were freed from the responsibility of child rearing, because they now had the responsibility for providing economic stability for their families. Now, with more parents working in factories, employers started creating schools for young children. These are the forerunners of daycares. Not too much has changed, huh? Churches and other organizations opened up Sunday schools because children couldn't work on Sundays. When the factories were closed, different churches would start teaching children how to read and write and other interesting facts about the world. Textile mills like Mann's Mill and those in Lowell were the chief employers of children, and children as young as 5 and 6 years old worked 10-hour days, 6 days a week without breaks. What's more, scraps of cotton would fill their lungs, giving rise to a lot of pulmonary disease. So the Sharon Sanitarium treated both adults and children for tuberculosis. And this picture on the right is the Children's Pavilion at the Sharon Sanitarium.
Which is still there. Which is still there, that building.
In 1836, Massachusetts created the first state child labor law requiring factory children under 15 to go to school for a minimum of 3 years per month. The National Child Labor Committee was established in 1904, and children who were laboring would have to wait more than 30 years until comprehensive restrictions and laws were really put in place that protected them. By the 19th century, it became the belief that children had the right of childhood free from labor and access to education. Oh, that's new. Where we go?
Good job.
So finally, labor laws were passed and children under the age of 16 couldn't work. If it was a dangerous job, it was the age of 18. And it restricted the number of hours that a child could work, and it created what many today take for granted, and that's childhood. So a child's worth. Children of working class families were valued for their economic contributions. Children of middle class families were sheltered from work, were expected to focus on their education. But today, a child's worth is measured in the emotional connection that we have with our children. And it has resulted in major reforms in child's welfare today. However, not all children are being protected, especially children who are involved in agricultural communities and the children of immigrants. This is a picture of our own Paradise Cranberry Meadows in Sharon, and you'll see that there's a number of children in there that were released from school so they could harvest cranberries. Policymakers started to see families, especially immigrants who were trying to preserve their traditional and religious values, as impediments to American progress. This is a part where we're traveling into the future, current day, and the power to influence families was now being transferred from the parents to the government and government agencies. So child rearing is switching from a parent's responsibility to the government's. Women now bear the responsibility for child rearing. We're fighting for changes in schools. Unfortunately, the same model for all children, regardless of their class, ethnicity, abilities, that all have ramifications. The government was playing an active role in the welfare of children, and daycares, nurseries, kindergartens were being established for working parents. Compulsory schooling, curriculum, playgrounds and communities, and the extension of high schools and child labor laws were responsible for the next switch and how children became perceived. Play will become considered necessary. It's necessary and beneficial to a child's growth, not only for pure amusement, but also it should have a practical importance to develop the skills that they will need as they grow. Play will become increasingly more gender specific, and we're going to have to ask ourselves, as you go upstairs, has play changed? Well, we see a girl playing with a hoop. Go upstairs. Try to play that game because there's one up there for you to roll. And it is the evolution of that rolling hoop that now gives us hula hoops. Children in colonial times used natural materials to make toys and decorations. They were creative, and so were their parents. They used whatever they had on hand or could find to make toys. They would take pressed flowers to make pictures. A button and a piece of string became a toy known as a whirligig. It's the forerunner of those toys that we now call fidget spinners. There's fidget spinners and whirligigs upstairs for you to play with. There's also ball and cup games. There's 9 pins, which is now pinball machine, but you can read up there all the explanations about these toys have evolved. What was probably the most common thing used to make dolls were the husks from corn. And there are corn husk dolls upstairs for you to play with. But what I find is interesting is that not only were the husks used, the cobs were used. And those became the first blocks, which eventually wound up being Legos. And from there we have magnetiles, and we have all kinds of technological changes, but the purposes are still there. Gourds were hollowed out and used as horns to make funny noises and loud or quiet sounds, and we have some gourds for you to rattle and shake, sing a little song, do a little dance, have some fun, because I told you if you're not having fun, I didn't do my job. So, why did colonial children play with toys? They did it to have fun. Today's kids play a lot of games on their computers, their mobile devices. They play with technology. Is that a big difference from colonial children? No. Because behind all the things that children play with, it is to prepare them for adulthood. And that really hasn't changed, has it?
Okay.
So now go upstairs and play and have fun. He opened Stoughton Institute, and parents were paying for high school educations for their children there. He ran that school for a number of years, and then the town voted to make central schools, they were discovering that, like at the East Elementary School where Deborah had taught, there were only 5 children, and they were all orphans that had been shipped out to live with other families. So they started the responsibility for running those one-room schoolhouses were the parents in each district. So it doesn't sound very original. We had the center school, the east school, the south school, the north school, and the west school. And it basically meant that children weren't required to attend a school if it was more than a mile to a mile and a half away from their home. And the parents of the school that was in their neighborhood were responsible for providing the wood, building the school, and all of that. However, when they started observing how many students were being educated in each one of these schools, they decided it would make more sense to build schools where all first to third grade would be in one school and another group would be in the next school, etc., etc. So it was a centralization of education for these children. And it's interesting that some of those farm children that were way out and some at the other ends of town would start using the trolley. That was their bus to school. But before that, it was up to the parents to have one of the fathers hitch up a wagon in the cold months and try to plow through to get to the one-room schoolhouse.
Interesting facts when Claire is talking about the districts. When you walk on Quincy Street from Ames Street to the lake, past Paul Revere on the right side, there is a little monument, stoned. It looks like a stone monument, maybe 6 by 8 inches marker, and it was marker of the district. And I've forgotten, I think it's east and west on it. You can see engraved letters on it. If I may add another interesting fact, the Sacred Heart School on East Foxborough, the boys dug out the pond, the skating pond there. The boys that were in the school, they dug it out by hand. And I also saw pictures of them farming what looks like tobacco. Huge leaves, that is not probably rhubarb. So they did lots of work there as well.
Are there any questions from the people attending by
Mary Beth.
in the what do you call it, chat?
Do you want to ask? Claire, you can probably ask and they will hear it.
What do you want me to do?
Do you want to ask Mary Beth if she wants? So people who are on the Zoom, if they have any questions for you.
Click on the chat.
Anybody on the Zoom has got any questions?
Type it in the chat.
Can you
Unmute yourself.
Click on the chat there, Donna,
I don't see
and, show it. There you go.
There.
Are there any questions there?
Yes, we can hear you, but we never got to see the PowerPoint.
Oh, darn, that was really good.
Well, you know what? There's a solution. Because in our new research room, on both computers, this whole PowerPoint is on both computers. So you can come in anytime during the open hours and see it there.
So after the talk, we went upstairs on the first level where this incredible display was prepared for us. Many people had a chance to walk around and truly discover the toys as well as different games. We also had snack time, tea time, and coffee, and we were really happy to actually, it was really nice atmosphere of exploring different toys and learning about them. Claire and Susie, I believe, did amazing job preparing this display, setting it up so it was easy to walk around and touch and feel different things. This was a really big surprise that basically corn husk was used as a construction toy. So I just took a very short video of this display. If you would like to read the full text, like right now, you can actually use the pause play button, pause it, and you should be able to read the full text. I would like to point out two things to you. So the first one is Lincoln logs. They were invented by John Lloyd Wright while he was working in Japan with his father, Frank Lloyd Wright. They saw a design of the Imperial Hotel in Tokyo, and they were very impressed by the interlocking timber beams used to construct the hotel, which were designed to make the building earthquake proof. So I believe he perfected the design in like 1916, 1918 he started selling it under, and then he patented his company in 1920, Toy Construction. The Lincoln logs are still sold today, and they were inducted into the National Toy Hall of Fame in 1999. As you can see, there were so many toys and they evolved over the years. However, in every one of them you can see the kind of primitive use of items that people already had at home, as Claire mentioned during her talk, and as well as many items were invented as accidents. Reminds me the story of penicillin. We were very happy to pull out many toys from our archives and display them for all to see. I would like to thank our archivist and again Claire and Susie. It was fantastic, and we would love to rotate more items so from the archives for display. And our museum is very small, however we are trying our best to rotate items and make sure that they are not just collecting dust, but they are viewed by public. It was very interesting and really well done display, and this is actually a super cool item from the archives donated by Gary. It's a basically you have to move your arms to make it move. Marbles and different hoops were a huge part of childhood, especially during colonial times. If you went to Stourbridge Village, you will see kids actually playing with these. They have a special camps and they basically submerge kids into colonial times. Mandala, checkers, chess were also a big hit. Maybe one day we will organize game night at the museum. So I'm sorry if you missed this talk. However, we understand it was very busy weekend, and maybe you can pop by during our open hours, Friday from 2 to 4, Saturday from 1 to 3, and Friday from 3 to 5, and see these displays. It was really interesting to see some of the dolls. I don't think I would like to play with this one, and how the toys evolved as well. This is one of my favorite items. That's basically evolution of current Viewmaster. It was called Stereoscope. It was lovely to see people looking at all those toys and either remembering them playing with them themselves or talking about their parents, grandparents, that they play with them. They are definitely, some of the toys were pretty related to gender. You could see that dolls and little dishes were typical girl toys and some were boys. However, there are many toys that are, I guess, gender neutral is the right word, and from animal farms and different nature related toys and construction sets. We all had really great time and it was fantastic, as Claire said, to kind of be a little free and play and have nice memories of our own childhood and childhood of our parents and grandparents. The corn husk dolls are very interesting. What I find super interesting is that my friend, a Native American, she has got huge tradition of making corn husk dolls. She also did them actually last year during our craft fair. However, I come from Eastern Europe and we also made them. So it's very interesting to see that different people around the world came up with the same idea. So this is my favorite toy. This is an instrument that was designed so that it could present a slightly different two-dimensional image of to each eye. This viewer would be interpreted as a single three-dimensional picture. It was invented by Charles Wheatstone and it was primarily used for entertainment purposes. Various versions of the stereoscope became extremely popular in Victorian England. And can you guess when it was invented? How old is the invention? So apparently he invented it in 1838. You probably know the new version of a Viewmaster. So Viewmaster, as we know it now, was invented 100 years later, 1939 to be exact. So we don't have right here on the display images from Sharon. We are protecting them in the archives. However, we have images of Sharon that are from that period, 1880s, I guess. And we made video before and we shared some pictures. However, these are from around the world and you are welcome to pop by during open hours and have a look at these super cool pictures yourself. So we had really great time exploring all the toys, but the best part about our quarterly meetings is the socializing afterwards, meeting with other members, and of course the snacks. So not only that Claire managed to do the whole presentation and display, she also baked incredible Christmas cookies for us and gingerbreads. We were very thankful for this meeting. It was really nice to gather together and put us in Christmas mood. The ladies also prepared little tiny gift shop that is selling some toys, so the prices are pretty low and we just would like to share a little bit of history. All the money that we make will go back to Sharon Historical Society, so thank you so much for supporting us. I hope you enjoyed this video and remember we will have more meetings in the future. Please join us for them. Thank you for watching Sharon Local History.